The galaxy was old. It had seen the birth and death of empires that lasted longer than most stars. It had watched species rise from the mud of their home worlds, reach for the heavens, and then disappear like dust in a solar wind. Civilizations had built wonders that stretched across entire star systems, and other civilizations had torn those wonders down. War was not new. Peace was not new. Nothing in the grand sweep of 10 billion years was truly new anymore. But there was one rule. One simple, unwritten rule that had survived every war, every treaty, every shift in galactic power. It was not carved into stone or written in any legal document. It was older than most governments and more respected than any law. Every species knew it. Every elder taught it. Every young officer heard it whispered on their first day of service. Never provoke the humans. Nobody could say exactly when the rule was born. On some species traced it back to the first contact between humans and the Velkari Dominion nearly 400 years ago. The Velkari had sent a war fleet of 600 ships to claim Earth's solar system. They expected a quick victory. Instead, a single human warship, just one, held the line at the edge of the system for 11 days. It fought without rest, without resupply, and without retreat. By the time human reinforcements arrived, the Velkari had lost 93 ships to that one vessel. They never returned. Others said the rule was even older, born during the fall of Reth Mar, when a tiny human colony of 40,000 people fought a full planetary siege against the Zorvathi Collective. The siege lasted 3 years. The humans had fewer soldiers, fewer weapons, and no hope of rescue. They won anyway. When the Zorvathi commander was asked how it happened, he said only, "They would not stop. We broke them again and again, and they would not stop." Whatever the origin, the rule was real, and every species that had ever tested it had learned the same hard lesson. In the year 2487, the galaxy was at an uneasy peace. Trade flowed through hundreds of systems. Diplomats argued in dozens of languages, and the great powers watched each other with careful, suspicious eyes. At the center of it all sat the Meridian Arch, a massive space station built in neutral territory. It served as a meeting place for all the major civilizations, a place where deals were made, disputes were settled, and wars were sometimes prevented. Commander Nathan Cole stood near a viewport on the station's upper ring, looking out at the stars. He was 42 years old, with short brown hair that was starting to show gray at the temples and a face that looked like it had been through a few difficult years but had come out the other side with its dignity intact. And he wore the dark blue uniform of the United Earth Navy, and he wore it well. He had been stationed on the Meridian Arch for 6 months as part of a standard peacekeeping rotation, and in that time he had earned a quiet reputation among the alien delegates. They said he was patient. They said he listened more than he spoke. They said that when he did speak, it was worth hearing. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Megan Price, walked up beside him and handed him a data tablet. And she was younger than Cole by about 10 years, with sharp green eyes and dark hair pulled back in a tight knot. She had a gift for reading alien body language, the subtle shifts in posture, the flicker of a secondary eyelid, the way a Dravine general curled his claws when he was lying. It was a talent that had saved more than one negotiation from falling apart. "The Dravine delegation is arriving in 2 hours," she said. "And they brought a fleet." Cole looked at the tablet, and the sensor data showed a formation of warships dropping out of slipspace at the edge of the station's perimeter. There were far more of them than diplomatic protocol allowed. He counted 60 vessels, including 3 heavy cruisers. "That is not a diplomatic escort," Cole said. "No, sir, it is not." The Dravine Empire was a problem that had been growing for decades. They were a reptilian species, tall and powerful, with thick-scaled skin and a culture built around conquest and dominance. For most of their history, they had been kept in check by their own internal rivalries and by the careful balance of power among the galaxy's major civilizations. But a new leader had risen among them, a young warlord named Torvax Gren, and he had united the Dravine factions under a single banner for the first time in 2 centuries. Torvax was ambitious, aggressive, and dangerous. But what made him most dangerous was that he did not believe in the old stories. And he had grown up hearing the rule about humans, and he considered it a fairy tale. His elder generals, veterans of the border conflicts a century ago, had tried to warn him. They told him about the battles they had seen, the human soldiers they had faced, the terrible patience of a species that could absorb punishment that would break any other civilization and then come back stronger. Torvax listened to none of it. He called the old generals cowards. He said the humans were soft, weak, and past their prime. He said the Dravine were destined to rule. 2 hours later, Torvax walked through the corridors of the Meridian Arch, like he owned it. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, with dark green scales and golden eyes that burned with pride. He wore ceremonial armor that gleamed under the station lights, and he was flanked by 12 armored guards who shoved aside anyone who did not move quickly enough. The delegates from a dozen species pressed themselves against the walls as he passed. Some bowed, some simply looked away. Commander Cole did neither. He stood in the corridor with his hands clasped behind his back as the Dravine procession approached. He did not step aside. He did not bow. He simply stood there, calm and still, and watched. Torvax stopped in front of him, and the warlord looked down at Cole. He was more than 2 feet taller, and studied him the way a predator studies something small. Then he spoke in the Dravine tongue, a low, rumbling sentence that his translator device did not bother to convert into English. His guards laughed. Torvax smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth, and then walked on. Behind him, at the back of the procession, an old Dravine general lingered. His name was Sairith. His scales were pale with age, and his left arm bore the scars of old plasma burns. He had fought in the border conflicts. He had seen what humans could do. He looked at Cole with something that was not contempt and not pity, but something closer to sorrow. "He does not know what he is doing," Sairith said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Cole heard him. He said nothing. He simply turned and walked back toward the human quarters, his boots clicking softly on the metal floor. Lieutenant Price fell into step beside him. "What did Torvax say to you?" she asked. "I do not know," Cole said, "but I have a feeling we are going to find out." That night, the Meridian Arch hummed with tension. The alien delegates whispered among themselves. The Ilyari clicked their mandibles nervously. The Velkari representatives, old enough to remember the shame of their ancestors, watched the Dravine fleet on their sensors and said nothing at all. And somewhere far away, as on a blue and green world orbiting a small yellow star, the people of Earth went about their lives. They did not know yet what was coming. They did not know that a young warlord with golden eyes had decided that the oldest rule in the galaxy was a lie. They would find out soon enough. And when they did, the galaxy would remember why the rule existed in the first place. The trade summit began the next morning in the grand hall of the Meridian Arch, a wide circular chamber with a domed ceiling made of transparent alloy that let the stars shine through. Delegates from over 30 species sat in tiered rows around a central speaking platform. It was supposed to be a place of reason, a place where words took the place of weapons. Torvax Gren turned it into a stage. He did not wait for the scheduled agenda. He did not follow the protocols of diplomatic address. He simply walked to the center platform, stood at full height, and began to speak. His voice was deep and carried easily across the hall without amplification. He announced that the Dravine Empire was claiming 3 star systems currently under human protection. The first was the Avery Expanse, a region rich in minerals and rare elements. The second was the Thal Ra Corridor, a narrow passage of space that served as a critical shipping lane. The third was the colony world of New Amherst, home to over 2 million human civilians. The hall went silent. And not the polite silence of attention, but the heavy silence of shock. Delegates glanced at each other. Several turned to look at the human section, where Commander Cole sat with his arms resting on the table in front of him. Cole did not move. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice or slam his fist on the table. He listened to every word Torvac said, and when the warlord finished, Cole simply reached down, pressed a button on his comlink, and spoke 3 quiet sentences to Earth Command. With shimmering wings folded against her, with shimmering wings folded against her back, found Lieutenant Price during the midday recess. She pulled her aside into a quiet alcove and spoke in a low voice. "Your commander's silence worries me more than any threat ever could," she said. "When the Velkari threatened your people, your admirals shouted and made demands. When the Zorvati tested your borders, your politicians made speeches. But your commander Cole says nothing. He just sits there." She paused, and her compound eyes reflected the corridor lights. "In my experience, when a human goes quiet, something terrible is about to happen." Price gave a small, polite smile and said, "I will pass along your concern, Ambassador." Far from the Meridian Arch, on the surface of New Amherst, the day was warm, and the sky was a soft shade of lavender. At New Amherst was a beautiful world. It had wide plains of golden grass, forests of tall blue-bark trees, and rivers that ran clear and cold from snow-capped mountains in the north. Humans had settled it 80 years ago, and in that time they had built a good life there. It was not a rich colony or a powerful one. It was simply a place where people lived, worked, raised their children, and called home. Laura Bennett stood at the front of her classroom in the colony's capital, in a modest city called Ridgeport. She was 36 years old, with kind eyes and a voice that could hold the attention of 30 restless children without ever rising above a conversational tone. She taught history, specifically the history of humanity's journey into space. "When our ancestors first left Earth," she told her students, "they did not know if they would survive. The galaxy was big and strange, and they were very small. But they went anyway. And they went because they believed that the universe had room for them, and they were willing to fight for that belief." A boy in the front row raised his hand. "Miss Bennett, are the Dravine going to attack us?" Laura looked at him. He was 9 years old, with messy hair and a worried face. She knelt down so she was at his eye level. "I do not know," she said honestly, "but I know that there are people looking out for us. And I know that we are not the kind of people who run." Across town, and a man named Danny Marsh was loading crates into the cargo hold of his old transport ship. Danny was 51, with a thick gray beard and hands that were rough from years of manual work. He had been a pilot in the Earth Navy when he was young, but that was a long time ago. Now he flew supply runs to the outer settlements, medicine, food, machine parts, the small necessities that kept a colony running. He had lived on New Amherst for 20 years, and he loved it in the quiet, unspoken way that people love a place that has become part of who they are. He had heard the news about the Dravine claims. Everyone had. The colony's communication network had been buzzing with it all morning. Danny did not say much about it. He just finished loading his ship, sat in the cockpit for a few minutes looking out at the lavender sky, and then reached under his seat and pulled out the service pistol he had kept from his Navy days. He checked it, cleaned it, and put it back. I was supposed to be a toast. Instead, he was supposed to be a toast. Instead, he delivered an insult. "I drink to the humans," he said, his golden eyes sweeping across the room. "Soft creatures from a dying world. They cling to their little colonies like children clinging to their mother's leg. I wonder, When the time comes, will they fight? Or will they simply cry? His delegation laughed. A few of the other species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Commander Cole took a sip of water and set his glass down. He did not react. Lieutenant Price, sitting beside him, noticed that his jaw tightened for just a moment. But that was all. Later that night, long after the banquet had ended and the corridors of the station had grown quiet, there was a knock on the door of the human quarters. That Lieutenant Price answered it and found General Sareth standing alone in the hallway, without guards or armor. He looked smaller without them. He looked old. "I wish to speak with your commander," he said, privately. Cole met him in a small conference room with no windows. They sat across from each other at a plain metal table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sareth began to talk. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care, and what he said carried the weight of a lifetime of regret. "I fought in the border conflicts," he said. "I was a young officer then, full of pride, full of fire. We were sent to take a mountain pass on the ice world of Keth Volan. Our intelligence said the humans had a small garrison there, maybe 200 soldiers. We sent 10,000. He paused and looked down at his scarred hands. "It took us 16 days to take that pass. 16 days against 200 humans. And they fought from every rock, every ridge, every frozen hole in the ground. When they ran out of ammunition, they fought with blades. When they ran out of blades, they fought with their hands. We killed them. Yes, we killed most of them. But the cost was beyond anything we had imagined. I lost friends on that mountain, good soldiers, strong soldiers. And every night, through the frozen air, we could hear the humans singing. They were dying and they were singing." He looked up at Cole. His old eyes were steady but tired. "I tried to warn Torvax. I showed him the records, the battle footage, everything. He does not listen. He thinks the old stories are lies told by cowards." Sareth leaned forward. "They are not lies, Commander. I was there. I know what your people are. So I must ask you, what will your people do?" Cole sat very still. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the station's life support systems. He thought about New Amherst, but he thought about the 2 million people living under that lavender sky. He thought about teachers and cargo pilots and children who were afraid. "Whatever we have to," he said. Sareth nodded slowly, as if that was the answer he had expected and feared. He stood, gave a slight bow of his head, and left without another word. An hour later, a priority transmission arrived from Earth Command. Commander Cole read it on his data tablet, alone in his quarters. The message was short. It was clear. And it changed everything. "Protect New Amherst, authorization granted." Cole set the tablet down, closed his eyes, and let out a long, slow breath. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and went to find Lieutenant Price. There was work to do. On Earth, the decision was made without fanfare. There were no dramatic speeches broadcast across the planet. There were no crowds waving flags or politicians pounding on podiums. The president of the United Earth government, a calm and gray-haired woman named Catherine Shaw, held a private meeting with her military council that lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, she signed a single document. Within the hour, orders were transmitted across a secure channel that stretched from Earth to the farthest reaches of human-controlled space. The Third Fleet was moving. Admiral Catherine Holt received the orders aboard her flagship, the Dreadnought-class warship Gallant Resolve, while it was docked at the Mars orbital yards. She read the orders once, read them again, and then called her senior staff to the briefing room. She was 55 years old, with silver hair cut short and a face that could have been carved from stone. She had served in the Navy for 32 years. She had fought in 2 border skirmishes, commanded a battle group during the Velkari incident, and spent 3 years as the head of Earth's Tactical Warfare Academy. Communication silence once we enter, communication silence once we enter slipspace. No broadcasts, no signals, No chatter. We move like ghosts. The Third Fleet consisted of 87 warships. There were fast destroyers and heavy cruisers, long-range missile frigates and electronic warfare corvettes. And at the center of the formation, like the heart of a living thing, sat the gallant Resolve, a ship so large that it had its own gravity generators and could sustain a crew of 4,000 for a year without resupply. It was not the biggest ship in the galaxy. The Draveen had vessels that were larger. But size had never been what made human warships dangerous. What made them dangerous was the people inside them. 6 hours later, the Third Fleet slipped into faster-than-light travel and vanished from every sensor grid in the solar system. It was as if 87 ships had simply ceased to exist. The fleet would cross hundreds of light years in silence, arriving at the Avery Expanse without warning. On the Meridian Arch, Commander Cole began making preparations. He ordered the evacuation of all non-essential human personnel from the station, civilian contractors, junior diplomatic staff, anyone who did not need to be there. He did it quietly, without making announcements. The evacuees were told it was a routine rotation. Most of them believed it. A few of them looked at Cole's face and knew better. Lieutenant Price had not slept in 2 days. She had set up a small intelligence operation in a back room of the human quarters, using the station's communication arrays to intercept and decode Draveen fleet transmissions. The Draveen used a layered encryption system that would have taken most species months to crack. Price had a team of 4 analysts, and they broke it in 9 hours. What they found was not good. But Torvax had positioned over 300 warships along the border of the Avery Expanse. Forward scout ships were already probing the Thal-Ra corridor, testing the edges of human-controlled space. Supply convoys were moving into staging areas. Troop transports were being loaded. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Torvax was not bluffing. He intended to invade. Price brought the intelligence to Cole. He studied the data for a long time, scrolling through the fleet positions and supply routes on his tablet. Then he looked up and said, "Send everything to Admiral Holt. She needs to see this before she arrives." "Sir, we are supposed to be in communications silence. Use the back channel, the one that runs through the Ilyari relay network. The Draveen do not monitor it." Price nodded and left. She trusted Cole. She did not always understand his methods, but she trusted his judgment. And right now, his judgment was telling him that this was going to get very bad before it got better. On the Draveen flagship, a massive warship called the Wrath of Gren, Torvax was in a celebratory mood. His advisors had presented him with intelligence reports suggesting that Earth's military response would be limited. Their analysts believed the humans would attempt to negotiate, offering trade concessions or territorial compromises in exchange for peace. The one advisor even suggested that the humans might abandon New Amherst entirely, withdrawing their civilians and ceding the planet without a fight. Torvax loved this idea. He stood in the war room of his flagship, surrounded by holographic maps of the contested systems, and laughed with genuine delight. "You see?" he said to his generals. "They are merchants, traders. They count their coins and measure their losses and do whatever costs the least. They will fold. They always fold." General Sareth stood at the back of the room. He had been removed from Torvax's inner council, but he still had the right to attend briefings as a senior officer. He listened to the young warlord's confidence and felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He waited until the other officers had filed out, and then he approached Torvax one final time. He carried a data device, an old one, military issue, scratched and worn from years of use. On it were recordings from the border conflicts. He had kept them for decades, not out of pride, but out of duty. He believed that memory was the only defense against repeating the mistakes of the past. "My lord," he said, "I ask you to watch these, just once." He played the recordings. The first showed human soldiers advancing across an open field under heavy plasma fire. They moved in tight formations, covering each other, dragging their wounded behind them as they pushed forward. And they did not scatter. They did not break. The fire tore holes in their lines, and they closed those holes and kept coming. The second recording was from a medical station behind the front lines of a human position. It showed human medics treating wounded Dravine prisoners. The enemy soldiers who were trying to kill them hours before were being given water, bandages, and painkillers by the same species they had been fighting. One Dravine prisoner, badly burned, that was being held upright by a human nurse who was half his size while a doctor treated his wounds. The third recording was an intercepted radio transmission from the siege of Keth Volan. The audio was rough, filled with static and the distant sound of explosions. A young human sergeant was speaking to what remained of his squad. His voice was steady even though he was clearly exhausted. "We are out of ammunition," he said. "We are out of food. We are out of everything except each other. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to hold this line, and if they come again, we fight with our hands, because that is what we do. That is what we have always done." Sarith turned off the recording and looked at Torvax. "This is what you are provoking," he said. "Not a government, not a fleet, a species that does not know how to surrender. A species that treats its enemies with kindness and then fights them with a fury that has no equal in this galaxy. I peace." Torvax stared at him for a long peace. Torvax stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned away. "Leave me," he said, "and do not come back." Sarith bowed and walked out. He did not argue. He did not beg. He had said what needed to be said, and it had not been enough. On New Amherst, the people prepared. Governor Paul Greer addressed the colony over the public broadcast system. Be a fight coming. I will not lie to you, be a fight coming. I will not lie to you about that. But I will tell you this. We built something here. Something worth keeping. And we are not going anywhere. Danny Marsh went to the Colonial Militia office and signed up that afternoon. Laura Bennett organized shelter plans for her students and made sure every family in her neighborhood knew where to go if the alarms sounded. Across the colony, ordinary people did what ordinary people have always done in times of danger. They looked after each other. And then, without warning, the stars changed. At the edge of the Avery Expanse, 87 human warships dropped out of slipspace in perfect formation. And they appeared on every sensor grid in the region at the same instant, Dravine, Allied, and neutral. The readings were unmistakable. The Third Fleet had arrived. Admiral Holt sat in her command chair aboard the Gallant Resolve and opened a single broadband channel. Her voice, calm and clear, carried across every frequency in the sector. "This space belongs to our people." Then she closed the channel, and the fleet began to move. The Battle of the Avery Expanse did not begin the way the Dravine expected. They had prepared for a direct assault, a wall of human ships charging headlong into their formations, trading fire at close range where the Dravine advantage in numbers would be overwhelming. That was how most species fought. That was how the Dravine themselves fought. Mass and fury, force against force, the stronger side grinding the weaker into dust. But Admiral Holt had no intention of fighting that kind of battle. She had studied Dravine tactics for years. She knew their strengths: raw aggression, fearless pilots, heavy armor, and sheer numbers. She also knew their weaknesses. They were predictable. They favored brute force over strategy. Their commanders were brave but inflexible, trained to charge rather than think, and most importantly, they had never fought a human fleet that was fully prepared and fully committed. And every previous encounter had been a skirmish, a border incident, a small engagement where the humans were outnumbered and caught off guard. This was different. This time the humans had come on purpose. Holt split her fleet into 3 task groups within the first hour of arriving in the sector. Each group had a specific mission, a specific target, and a specific commander who had been briefed in detail during the silent journey through slipspace. The first task group was led by Captain Greg Palmer aboard the cruiser Steadfast. Palmer was 38, a former test pilot who had earned his rank by being the best ship handler in the fleet. His job was simple: draw the Dravine vanguard away from the main fleet and make them chase him through the asteroid fields of Vera Minor. It worked beautifully. Palmer took his 12 ships and flew straight at the Dravine forward line, fired a single volley, and then turned and ran. The Dravine vanguard commander, a young officer eager to prove himself to Torvax, took the bait immediately. He sent 60 ships in pursuit. The asteroid fields of Vera Minor were a nightmare of spinning rock, metallic debris, and shifting gravitational currents. Most species avoided them entirely. Human pilots had been training in them since they were cadets. Palmer's ships wove through the debris like fish through a reef, banking and rolling between tumbling boulders the size of buildings. The Dravine pilots, brave but unfamiliar with the terrain, tried to follow. They could not. Ship after ship slammed into asteroids, clipped spinning debris, or lost control in the gravitational eddies. Those that survived the terrain found themselves scattered and isolated, easy targets for Palmer's gunners who knew every shadow and hiding spot in the field. In 3 hours, the Dravine lost 41 ships in the asteroid fields. Palmer lost 2, and he pulled his task group out the far side of the field, regrouped, and waited for further orders. The second task group was commanded by Captain Lisa Cho. She was 44, quiet, precise, and known throughout the fleet for her ability to plan an operation down to the second. Her target was not the Dravine warships, but their supply lines. Every fleet, no matter how powerful, needed fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts. Cut the supply lines, and even the mightiest armada would starve. Cho took her task group deep into the Thalra corridor, moving fast and hitting hard. Her ships targeted fuel depots, cargo transports, and communication relays. They struck without warning and disappeared before the Dravine escorts could respond. In 12 hours, she destroyed or disabled over 30 supply vessels and 4 major fuel stations. The Dravine fleet in the Avery Expanse would begin running low on resources within days. During one engagement, a Dravine destroyer broke through her formation and turned directly toward her flagship, engines at full burn. It was a ramming attempt, a desperate, suicidal attack that was considered the highest form of Dravine bravery. Cho watched it come on her tactical display. She did not flinch. "All forward batteries, point-blank range," she said calmly. "Fire when ready." The broadside struck the Dravine destroyer along its entire length. But Cho watched it pass, then turned to her flagship. Cho watched it pass, then turned to her helmsman and said, "Resume course." The third task group was the Hammer, and Admiral Holt held it herself. She took the Gallant Resolve and the bulk of the fleet's heavy warships directly toward New Amherst. This was the fight that mattered. This was where the war would be won or lost. Torvax saw her coming. To defend from a distance, to defend from a distance, to use long-range weapons and avoid close engagement. Instead, they were coming straight at him. He did not understand it. His advisors urged him to wait, to let the humans come to him and fight on ground of his choosing. But Torvax had never been patient. He committed his main fleet to a head-on engagement, pushing over 200 warships forward in a massive wedge formation aimed directly at the human line. The two fleets met above New Amherst, and the sky burned. The battle was fierce. The Dravine fought with savage courage, just as Sareth had warned. Their ships were tough, and their crews were willing to die. They threw themselves at the human formation again and again, pounding it with plasma cannons and torpedo volleys that lit up the darkness of space like a terrible sunrise. The humans took losses, real losses. The destroyer Kendrick was hit by concentrated fire from 3 Dravine cruisers. Its shields failed, its hull breached, and it broke apart in a flash of white light. All hands, 112 crew members, were lost. The frigate Morning Light took a torpedo to its engine section and went dark, drifting and burning. Its crew had to be evacuated under fire, shuttles dodging plasma bolts as they carried wounded sailors to safety. But the human line held. Every time the Dravine broke through a section of the formation, other ships closed the gap. Every time a human vessel was crippled or destroyed, its neighbors fought harder. The fleet bent, but did not break. And as the hours wore on, the Dravine began to notice something that chilled them more than any weapon. The humans were adapting, and they were learning the Dravine attack patterns in real time, adjusting their formations, shifting their fire, exploiting weaknesses that had not been there an hour before. On the surface of New Amherst, a small Dravine landing force punched through the orbital battle and made it to the ground. About 200 Dravine soldiers touched down in dropships near the eastern settlements, 5 miles from the town of Harlan Ridge. Here their orders were to establish a foothold and secure the colony's eastern power grid. The colonial militia was waiting for them. Danny Marsh was in the front line, crouched behind a stone wall at the edge of a wheat field. His old service rifle was in his hands, and his heart was hammering in his chest. Beside him was a young sergeant named Chris Dunn, 24 years old, who had never seen combat before today. Chris was pale, and his hands were shaking. Just stay close and keep shooting. We 100 meters away. We're going to get you out of here. No, sir. I'm not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere? 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 You're not going anywhere. 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 Just stay close and keep shooting. We will figure out the rest as we go. The Dravine came across the field in a wedge formation, just like their ships. They were tall, armored, and terrifying. Their plasma rifles glowed in the early morning light. The ground shook with their footsteps. And the militia opened fire. The fighting was close and brutal. The Dravine were stronger, better armed, and better trained. But the militia had the advantage of ground they knew. Every ditch, every fence line, every rise in the terrain. Danny took a plasma burn to his left arm that scorched through his jacket and seared the skin beneath. He gritted his teeth, switched his rifle to his right hand, and kept firing. Chris Dunn saw an opportunity. A shallow irrigation ditch ran along the south side of the wheat field, curving behind the Dravine position. He grabbed 6 militia members and led them through it at a crawl, moving through mud and cold water until they were behind the enemy line. When he gave the signal, they rose and fired into the Dravine flank. The surprise was total. The Dravine formation broke apart, and the rest of the militia surged forward. By morning, the landing force was defeated. 43 Dravine soldiers were dead, 27 were captured. The rest had retreated to their dropships and fled back to orbit, where they found that orbit was no longer safe either. Above the planet, Torvax watched the tactical display in his war room and saw his fleet dissolving. His vanguard was gone, scattered in the asteroid fields. His supply lines were cut. His main fleet was being pushed back, ship, by a human force half its size that simply refused to give ground. Admiral Holt opened a channel to the wrath of Gren. Her face appeared on the Dravine view screen, calm and composed, without a trace of triumph or cruelty. "High Sovereign Torvax," she said, "your fleet is broken. Your supply lines are severed. You have no path to victory. I am offering you the chance to surrender with honor. Take it." Torvax trembled with rage. His claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. "I will not surrender to your kind," he hissed. Behind him, the General Cyrith stepped forward. He walked slowly across the bridge, past the stunned officers, past the tactical displays showing the ruin of the Dravine fleet. He stopped at the communications console and entered his command codes. Codes that, as a senior general, he still had the authority to use. "I told you, my lord," he said quietly. Then he transmitted the surrender code on behalf of the entire Dravine fleet. Torvax roared and drew his ceremonial blade. And he spun toward Cyrith with murder in his golden eyes. But before he could take a step, his own officers seized him, 4 of them, grabbing his arms and pulling the blade from his grip. They held him as he thrashed and cursed, and they did not let go. The war was over. It had lasted less than 2 days. In the days that followed the surrender, the Avery expanse grew quiet. The wreckage of destroyed ships drifted in slow, silent orbits around New Amherst, glinting in the light of the system's sun like broken glass on a dark road. Recovery teams from both sides moved through the debris fields, searching for survivors, recovering the dead, and cataloging the cost of what had happened. The cost was real. The humans had lost 7 ships and over 400 crew members. The Dravine losses were far greater, nearly 90 vessels destroyed and thousands of soldiers killed or captured. But Admiral Holt took no pleasure in the numbers. She stood in the observation deck of the Gallant Resolve, looking out at the wreckage, and her expression was not one of victory. It was the expression of someone who had done a terrible and necessary thing, and who understood the weight of it completely. "Every one of those ships had a crew," she said quietly to her aide, a young lieutenant named Sam Beckett, who stood beside her with a data tablet in his hands. "Every crew member had a family. Remember that." "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now get me a secure channel to the Meridian Arch. We have a peace to build." The ceasefire negotiations took place in the same grand hall where Torvax had announced his territorial claims just weeks before. The irony was not lost on anyone. Commander Cole led the human delegation, sitting in the same seat he had occupied when the warlord had tried to humiliate him. He wore the same uniform. He carried the same calm expression. But the room felt different now. That the alien delegates who had watched in silence as Torvax made his threats now watched in silence as Cole laid out the terms of peace. The terms were firm. The Dravine would withdraw from all contested systems immediately. They would release any captured personnel, military or civilian, within 72 hours. They would submit to a 10-year arms limitation treaty that restricted the size of their fleet and the placement of their military bases. And they would pay reparations to the colony of New Amherst for the damage caused by the landing force. But the terms were also fair. The humans did not demand the dismantling of the Dravine Empire. They did not seek to occupy Dravine worlds or humiliate their people. They did not ask for revenge. Cole made this clear in his opening statement. "We did not want this war," he said. We do not want another one. We want to live in peace, and we want the same for you. As these terms are designed to make sure that peace lasts. They are not designed to punish. The Ilyari ambassador, who served as the neutral mediator for the negotiations, tilted her head in a way that among her species indicated deep respect. Several other delegates murmured their agreement. Even the Dravine representatives, a group of senior officers who had replaced Torvax's inner circle, accepted the terms without significant objection. They were tired. They had seen enough. Torvax himself was dealt with by his own people. In the weeks following the surrender, the Dravine Council of Generals convened a tribunal. Sairith, now recognized as the senior military authority, presented the case against Torvax. It was not complicated. The young warlord had ignored the counsel of his advisors, provoked a war the Empire could not win, and brought disaster upon his people. The tribunal's verdict was unanimous. Torvax was stripped of his rank, his titles, and his authority. He was exiled to a remote colony world on the outer edge of Dravine space, a cold and barren place where he would live out his days in obscurity. When the guards came to take him away, Torvax looked at Sairith one last time. The old general expected to see rage, defiance, perhaps even a threat. Instead, he saw something he had not expected. He saw a young man who was beginning to understand, far too late, the size of his mistake. Torvax said nothing. He turned and walked away between his guards, and the door closed behind him. Sairith was named interim leader of the Dravine Empire, a role he accepted with reluctance. He had never wanted power. He had only ever wanted to serve, and to prevent the kind of catastrophe that had just occurred. His first act as leader was to travel to Earth for a formal peace ceremony, a journey that no Dravine ruler had made in the history of the two civilizations. He arrived at Earth orbit aboard an unarmed transport ship. It was a deliberate choice. He wanted the humans to see that he came without threat, without pride, and without the arrogance that had defined his predecessor. The ceremony was held in Geneva, in the Great Hall of the United Earth Government. Admiral Holt was there, along with Commander Cole, Lieutenant Price, and representatives from every branch of Earth's military and diplomatic service. When Sairith entered the hall, the room fell silent. He walked to the center of the floor, stopped in front of Admiral Holt, and bowed. Not a nod, not a slight inclination of the head, but a full bow, deep and slow, with his scarred hands held open at his sides. In Dravine culture, this gesture was reserved for those considered equals in honor. It had not been offered to a non-Dravine in living memory. Holt returned the bow, not as deep, but sincere. Then she extended her hand. Sairith looked at it for a moment. The gesture was unfamiliar to him. And then he took it. His grip was careful, as if he were holding something fragile and valuable. "I hope this is the beginning of something better," Holt said. "As do I," Sairith replied. Far from Earth, on New Amherst, life slowly returned to normal. The wreckage from the ground battle at Harlan Ridge was cleared. The damaged buildings were repaired. The wheat fields, scorched and trampled during the fighting, after the battle. On the first day, after the battle. On the first day, her students filed in with wide eyes and restless energy. They wanted to talk about what had happened. They wanted to know about the soldiers, the ships, the fighting. Laura let them talk for a while, and then she told them the truth in words they could understand. "Oh, it was scary," she said. "People were hurt. Some people were very brave. Your families and your neighbors stood up to protect each other, and that is something you should always remember. Not the fighting, not the ships, but the fact that when things got hard, the people around you did not run away." Danny Marsh's arm healed slowly. The plasma burn left a twisted scar that ran from his elbow to his wrist, and he said it ached when the weather turned cold. He went back to flying cargo runs, but loading crates and making deliveries to the outer settlements like he always had. On clear nights, when the stars were bright and the wind was still, he would sit on the loading ramp of his ship with a glass of whiskey and look up at the sky. Sometimes he raised the glass just slightly toward the stars. He never said who the toast was for, but the crew of the Kendrick did not need to be named to be remembered. The Commander Cole finished his rotation on the Meridian Arch and was promoted to captain. He received the promotion quietly, without ceremony, which was how he preferred things. Lieutenant Price was offered a position in Earth's Diplomatic Intelligence Division, and she accepted. Before they left the station, the Ilyari ambassador found Cole in the docking bay. "I have lived for 400 years, Commander," she said. "I have seen wars begin and end. I have watched empires crumble and new ones rise. And in all that time, I have never seen anyone keep their composure the way you did during that summit. I watched Torvax insult you, threaten your people, and mock everything you stand for. And you did not flinch. How?" Cole gave a small, tired smile. "I was terrified the whole time," he said. "But my people were counting on me to stay calm. So I stayed calm." The ambassador studied him for a moment with her compound eyes, and then she made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That," she said, "is exactly why the rule exists." 50 years later, on the Draveen homeworld, a young student sat in a history class. The teacher was old, with pale scales and a missing hand, a veteran of a war that had ended long before the student was born. He was teaching the class about the conflict with the humans, about the rise and fall of Torvax Grin, and about the peace that had followed. The young student raised his hand. "Teacher," he said, "why is the oldest rule in the galaxy about the humans? They are small, they are fragile, their bodies are soft, and they live such short lives. Why should anyone be afraid of them?" The old teacher stopped. He looked out the window at the wide red sky of the Draveen homeworld, and for a moment he was quiet. Then he turned back to the class. "Because they are all of those things," he said, "and none of it has ever stopped them. They do not fight because they are the strongest. They do not conquer because they want to rule. They fight because there are things they love, and they refuse to lose them. A human will cross a galaxy for a friend. A human will stand in front of a fire for a stranger. A human will hold a line until there is nothing left of them, and with their last breath, they will pass the line to the one standing behind them. I have seen this, and I have the scars to prove it." He looked at the young student and held his gaze. "There is no empire in this galaxy that has ever found an answer to that kind of courage. Not one. Not in 10 billion years." The classroom was quiet. The young student looked down at his notebook. He picked up his pen and slowly, carefully, he wrote 5 words. "Never provoke the humans." Then he underlined them, twice.